In 1740, Maria Theresa, the new Habsburg Empress, upended European balance. How did her ascension affect the fates of the imperial powerhouses France and England? How did they use this female presence to promote their own global spread? In the War of Austrian Succession, these European juggernauts jostled for control of Europe, North America, and India. In this second part of a continuing series in the Wars of Imperial Struggle, we examine the War of Austrian Succession and its impact on France, England, and the globe. This is Legendary Tactics. In October of 1740, Charles VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, died, leaving his only remaining relative, Maria Theresa, heir to the Habsburg throne. In Prussia, Frederick the Great saw weakness and opportunity for growth, and so invaded his forces into Habsburg lands. What ensued would be a series of skirmishes involving France and Spain, who sided with the Habsburgs against Prussia, England, and the Dutch Republic forces fighting to unseat Maria Theresa. After 8 years of gains and losses for both sides and little change on the map, the war would end. Not too dissimilar to how it started, with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in October of 1748. This truce was instigated by British and France, and with other forces following their lead. The treaty was marked by most lands ceding back to its pre-war owners, with some notable exceptions. These included the fortress of Louisbourg in Nova Scotia, going to France, Madras in India to England. Maria Theresa retained Austrian lands but gave up Silesia in the north to Prussia, who now had become a substantial presence in Europe. Both Britain and France were trying to win the friendship of Prussia, now clearly a significant power. Prussia would clearly be angling itself as a force for the next war. In the commercial struggle between England and France and the West Indies, Africa, and India, nothing was settled. The treaty was thus no basis for a lasting peace. Looking at imperial struggle, there are 4 theaters that the War of Austrian Succession covers. Central Europe. This theater saw numerous skirmishes, battles with flip-flopping sides of ownership during the duration of the war. Prussia was able to push into Austria, causing Maria Theresa to seek safety in Hungary until she could rebuild her forces and retake Austria. King George's War. King George's War was the third of 4 French-Indian Wars. It took place primarily in British provinces of New York, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Nova Scotia. Its most significant action was an expedition organized by Massachusetts Governor William Shirley that would besiege and ultimately capture the French fortress of Louisbourg in 1745. The First Carnatic War. The Carnatic Wars were a series of military conflicts in India. These conflicts involved numerous struggles for succession and territory, and included a diplomatic and military struggle between French East India Company and the British East India Company. They were fought mainly within the territories of Mongol India, eventually led to control by the British Company over most of India, and eventually to the establishment of the British Raj. 3 Carnatics were fought between 1746 and 1763. Jacobite Rebellion. The Jacobite Rising of 1745, also known as the 45 Rebellion, was an attempt by Charles Edward Stuart to regain the British throne for his father, James Stuart. It took place during the War of Austrian Succession, when the bulk of the British Army was fighting in mainland Europe, and proved to be the last in a series of revolts that began in 1689, with more major outbreaks happening in 1708, 1715, and 1719. Now let's focus in on a few of the cards in imperial struggle that directly link to the War of Austrian Succession. War of Jenkins' Ear. Lasting from 1739 to 1748, mainly in New Granada and among the West Indies of the Caribbean Sea, this battle refers to Robert Jenkins, a captain of the British merchant ship who, having suffered his ear being severed off by Spanish sailors when they boarded his ship in a time of peace. Urban legend has it that the ear was brought back and exhibited before the British Parliament, but no evidence exists. Carnatic Wars. These again were mainly fought in the Mongol territories of India, and eventually led to the British Company taking over most areas and the establishment of the British Raj. There were 3 Carnatic Wars fought between 1746 and 1763. Hyder Ali. As the Sultan and de facto ruler of the Kingdom of Mysore in southern India, Hyder Ali distinguished himself militarily. He concluded an alliance with the French against the British and used the services of French workmen in raising his artillery and arsenal. Father Le Loutre's War. This was also known as the Indian War or the Micmac War, and took place between King George's War and the French-Indian War in Acadia. On one side of the conflict, the British and New England colonists were led by British officer Charles Lawrence. On the other side, Father Jean-Louis Le Loutre led the Micmac and Acadian military in a guerrilla-style warfare against the settlers. The war would end after 6 years with the defeat of the Mi'kmaq Acadians and the French. The Pacte de Famille. This was one of 3 separate but similar alliances between the Bourbon kings of France and Spain. As part of the settlement of the War of Spanish Succession that brought the House of Bourbon of France to the throne of Spain, Spain and France made a series of agreements that did not unite the 2 thrones, but did cooperate on defined bases. Admiral John Byng in Byng's Trial. Admiral John Byng was a Royal Navy officer who was court-martialed and executed by firing squad. Now, this did not happen until after the War of Spanish Succession, but he was definitely relevant during. After joining the Navy at the age of 13, Byng participated in the Battle of Cape Passaro in 1718. Over the next 30 years, he would build up a reputation as a solid naval officer and received promotions all the way to Vice Admiral, which happened in 1747, 1 year before this War of Spanish Succession would end. He served as Commodore General of Newfoundland Colony in 1742 during the war, and Commander-in-Chief of Leith in 1745 to 1746. He was a member of Parliament in 1751 until his death. This was the War of Austrian Succession. It led to a lot of stalemates and reversals, with a few notable exceptions. France gaining Louisbourg, and the rise of Prussia in Central Europe as they gained Silesia and became a major power and player. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video, the 7 Years' War, featuring the 3rd of 4 battles in Imperial Struggle. This is Legendary Tactics.